All right, good morning, everybody. This is Wednesday morning's edition of Ask the Master Auto Technician. Karen Schoen should be calling around 6:15. I think she's going to be talking about a constitutional convention, the good, the bad, and the ugly if it does happen. A lot of people have talked about it, about what would happen if it did happen, and maybe all rules would be off the table, and maybe the Constitution we have now would be completely changed. Who knows? But anyway, if you got a comment or question about it, give us a call at 6:15 at 763-0555 when we talk to Karen Schoen about it. But one of the things I'd like to talk about is crank no start. I hear that all the time. And the hardest thing I have about when someone comes in and says, I need to drop my car off here of a crank no start, is making sure that they understand what they think they just told me means. Crank no start. That means you turn the key, the car turns over, and it doesn't fire up. I've had some people, and when that happens, I have to ask them, okay, when does it happen? What does it do? When you turn the key, when you turn the car over, does it turn over or does it not turn over? I had a customer come in yesterday and said, I have a crank no start. And I was sitting here talking to him, and finally it dawned on me when he turned the key, it didn't turn over, he turned the key and nothing happened. So please, when you go to tell a customer, a shop, this is the problem I'm having with the car, explain to them, make sure they completely understand what's going on. Because if I just let this customer go with what he was telling me, I have a crank no start, I would have never figured out what the problem was with the car. But as I talked to him, I said, please tell me what the car is doing. And he explained to me, he goes down the road, hits a bump, and the car will sometimes just shut off. We don't have to hit a bump. Car will just shut off, pulls over to the side of the road, puts the car in neutral or park, cranks the car, and he says, we cranks the car and nothing happens. And he said that 2 or 3 times. I said, wait a minute, you crank the car and nothing happens. What do you mean you crank the car and nothing happens? Well, I turn the key and nothing happens. So the engine doesn't turn over? That's right, there's no noise. Okay, so there's no crank, it just turn the key and nothing happens. Correct. Okay, how do you get it to start? Well, after I wait a minute or two, all of a sudden I turn the key and it starts. Or turns over, then it starts. And I go, okay, so let me get this straight. What your experience is a car that goes down the road, shuts off, you pull over the side of the road, you turn the key, and the car doesn't turn over at first. You wait a minute or two, now the car turns over. And then you said, in the conversation, you said something about a theft light. And when he told me that, I said, wait a minute, theft light. If you see a theft light on a vehicle, normally that means that it thinks the car is being stolen or is shut power off to the computer because it thinks it's stolen. Now, they can shut power off to the computer not because it thinks it's stolen, it's because it has a bad relay. That's where I'm going on this. So you need to, because what we were seeing yesterday on the customer's car, there's 2 relays on this car. There's more than 2, there's 3. But 2 of them, one's for the starter relay and one's for one that powers up the computer. All cars have a power-up relay for the computer. Honest to goodness, they've got one. And if they don't, when you turn the key to the on position, if they don't power up and allow things to get power, 12 volts, the car is not going to run. Normally what that power-up does is supplies 12 volts to the injectors and to the coils. That's what it does. And that's another way to find out if you've got a crank no start. If the car turns over and you have it in the crank position or the run position, go see if you have voltage to your coils or to your injectors. If you turn the car to the on position, you will always have 12 volts to the injectors, whether the car is cranking or not, if the key is on. If you have 12 volts, battery voltage going to your injectors, that's not your problem. That relay is not your problem. But you will be surprised how many times people will come in and have a crank no start, and we turn the key, and we verify that it cranks over and won't start. And the first thing we do is we go out and we verify that we have 12 volts going to the injectors. You'll be surprised how many times we don't have 12 volts going to injectors. We may only have 5 volts going to injectors. Boy, you see that, you go, what can that mean? Well, that means the relay's bad and it's got a lot of voltage drop. And all we do is change the relay. In most cases, not always, that'll take care of the problem. And when it goes to a crank, now you have 12 volts going to the coils and going to the injectors. And now what the computer does, it gives it a ground. It gives it a ground to make the injectors fire, and it gives it a ground to make the coils fire. That's how it works. It's got, that computer just gives it a ground. That's its job. It doesn't supply voltage. That's being supplied by the fuse box or the relay. So when a car it turns over and won't start, make sure the shop you're dealing with can verify the problem you're talking about. In most cases, that's very difficult, extremely difficult, especially if it's intermittent. Like the gentleman yesterday, he says, "This is what my car does, and I don't know, it just shuts off, go pull over the side of the road, and it turn the key, nothing happens for a minute or two, then it turn the key and it fires up." Well, just by grins and giggles, this is something I found out years ago on Ford vehicles. They have something called a wiggle test. Now, the wiggle test came out in the 80s about when we had a problem. Back then, we didn't have a data stream. Cars didn't have a data stream. You could plug in a scanner and see what this read, this read, this read, this read, this read, like we have now. And we have so much information out there compared to what we used to have. So they had a wiggle test. So what they tell you to do is start the vehicle up, get the car where it's running, idling correctly, and then gently tug and wiggle and twist and move the wiring to see what happens. And they also tell you to slap the fuse box. I know, just tap it. They don't have to slap it like you're trying to kill it. Just kind of jar it. Well, that's what I did yesterday when the car came in. The car started right up, and I said, "I can't believe this. This car starts right up. There's nothing wrong with it. There's no codes in it, other than it had a P1000. When I read that, a P1000 on a Ford means, someone has reset the battery, cut the battery off, and cleared the codes, and it hasn't been able to run any of its tests. Well, I know the customer hasn't done that. So that told me immediately I'm not getting any power to the computer. The computer's losing its power. Well, come to find out, when I slapped the fuse box and the car died, I kind of looked at it and went, the car died when I hit the fuse box. When I turned the key, and for a split second, there was no crank. And then I turned it back and turned it again, and it turned over. And I went, wait a minute. Could it be the relays? Something as simple as the relays? Walk back there and open the box up, and the starter relay and the E4 power relay are right next to each other. Relays are relatively inexpensive. So this is something you might want to consider if you have an intermittent crank, no start, or you have, or turn the key and nothing happens and it starts. These relays are very, very common in most cars. Ford, Chevy, Chrysler, especially Chrysler's always had a starter relay in addition to a starter solenoid. So they got like one extra step. So they have these relays in there, and they're just like points that we used to have on cars, to make them run. You had points and condenser. Well, we changed the points because over a period of time, the points opening and closing, opening and closing, opening and closing actually pitted. And they actually caused high resistance, and you got voltage drops, and you had problems. Well, the same thing happens today. When it makes the terminal closes, it's supposed to give a ground or give power. Well, sometimes it doesn't do what it's supposed to do, and you don't get the full 12 volts, or you don't get any voltage, or it doesn't close the contact, or something happens. It's mechanical. It's mechanical that moves. It's not like it's a relay that's an electronic relay. And yes, they make electronic relays that don't have any moving parts, and that's where a lot of cars are going. They're getting rid of the the mechanical relays and going to a electronic relay where there's no moving parts. I know things get a little, those get really tough to figure out sometimes, but still, the point being is, if that happens, relays are very inexpensive. Go buy you a couple of relays from the parts store. I recommend buying them from the manufacturer, not from the auto parts store, due to some of the problems on reverse engineering with relays. Remember, some of these relays are still proprietary, and they haven't been released to be made. I shouldn't say that on all of them, but a lot of them haven't. So if you question about a relay, please either go to a salvage yard and get one out of a car that has the name brand on it, like Ford, Chevy, General Motors, whatever. Same thing, or buy one from the dealership. That's what I'm going to recommend. There's certain things I recommend. PCV valves, oxygen sensors, fuel pumps, and relays really should come from the manufacturer. Anything that has to do with emission systems really should be from the manufacturer. EGR valves, O2 sensors, things like that. It's kind of hard to get them exact. They're kind of NQR. When they're not made from the manufacturer, they're made from an aftermarket source. NQR means not quite right. They work, but they're a little marginal there. They may not go all the way down to 0 voltage on the oxygen sensor, or maybe not go all the way up to 0.9 on the oxygen sensor. They may only go down to 0.2 and go up to 0.7. I've seen brand new ones out of a box. Won't get any higher than 0.7. Now, that'll make it go into closed loop. It'll make it run, It won't make it run exactly the way it's supposed to run. It'll get close, but they'll use more fuel. It won't run right, in my opinion. And I see what's coming out the tailpipe, and I go, I know that oxygen sensor should be going higher than 0.7 and should be dropping lower than 0.2. So I take that one out, put one from the manufacturer in there, goes down below 0.2, goes down to almost 0, goes back up to almost 0.9, back and forth. I go, now that's how it's supposed to work. Even though both of them were supposed to be OE equivalent, one of them was made by the manufacturer, one of them was OE equivalent, it wasn't. Even though it was reverse engineered, said it was made by the same company that made it, but I don't believe it was. If it was, it wasn't the same quality. Let's put it that way. So when you're dealing with cars less than 10 years old, try to use the factory equipment factory manufactured equipment when it comes to oxygen sensors. Anything that has to do with emissions or relays or injectors or anything that has to do with fuel delivery as well. So we've addressed that. But on a crank no start, if you have a crank no start, the thing you need to be looking for is, if it does turn over, is do you have spark? Number one. How do you tell that? Pull a spark plug wire out, or pull a coil off, put a screwdriver in it, and hold not a wooden handle screwdriver, a plastic handle screwdriver, and hold the metal shaft of the screwdriver about a ½ inch away from anything on the block that's metal. Have someone crank the car and see if you can throw fire at least a ½ inch. If it doesn't throw spark at least a ½ inch to an inch, you got a problem. If it only throws fire just a teeny tiny bit, that coil is bad, or if it's got more than one coil, you might want to check it. Normally, most cars have more than one coil now. They have one per cylinder. But some cars have a coil for every 2 cylinders, one coil. And some cars, some cars still today only have one coil for everything. Not very many, but there's a few of them out there. So that's one of the things I'm letting you, kind of give you some ideas about how to check for crank no start. Make sure you have spark. If you have spark, then that part is okay. The second thing is, do you have, it means your spark plugs and your ignition and your crank sensor and all those are working like they're supposed to if you have spark. If you have a distributor, it means it's working like it's supposed to. The second thing you check is, do you have fuel? Now, that's a little tougher. That really is. That's a little tougher. So one of the things I recommend is have a can of carburetor cleaner. If you got spark, take a can of carburetor cleaner, throttle body cleaner that's flammable, spray it down the throttle body while someone cranks the car. If the car tries to start and run, you got a fuel delivery problem. That doesn't mean the fuel pump's bad. It just means you got a fuel delivery problem. It could be the fuel pump, could be a fuel pump relay. It could be where the injectors themselves are not blinking. That's right, could be something in that area. So you need to make sure what's happening. I've seen that happen where you'll have spark, won't have any fuel, but you got fuel pressure. And there'll be a problem with the distributor, will not allow the injectors to fire. I've seen that happen. So those are just some areas to get you started. Now, what if you have a car that has spark, has fuel, and still won't start? Well, then you might have a mechanical issue. Well, there's no might about it. You do have a mechanical issue. The mechanical issue may be a clogged up exhaust, or it could be a slipped timing chain. I had a car come in yesterday. The problem was it got towed in there. Someone changed the oil, forgot to put oil in the car, drove it for a day and a half, and they bring it to me, and I listen to it, turn the key, there's no compression. What can you do for it? Put another engine in it. It's that bad. When you ride one without oil and you have no compression, now you got a mechanical issue. You have a crank no start. So remember, it had fuel, it has spark, it just doesn't have any compression. We have a mechanical problem. If you got good mechanical condition and you got spark and you got fuel, the cars should run. Maybe not extremely well, but they should run. Hey, this is James Morris. Give us a call back at 850-763-0555. Karen Schoen will be on in just a minute. We're going to talk about a constitutional convention. The good, the bad, the ugly, why we should, why we shouldn't. If you want to get in on it, we'll talk then. We'll be right back. Summer is here and the days are getting longer and hotter. Call James Auto Center for a free cooling system evaluation and consultation. Give us a call, 850-763-0555 today.
Part of what I'd like to let you know is what we do and how we work our system. Basically, we've got about 700 stocking dealers scattered around the 15 counties here in the Big Bend area of the state. I run a fleet of trucks, vans, and what we call hotshot vehicles to deliver to our dealers quickly so they can help service you as fast and efficiently as they can. Provide timely and efficient service, and we're there to take care of our dealers, who in turn can take care of their customers.
If you want the best deal in town for tires, you need to call Baytown Tires at 873-8900. Hanson and the guys at Baytown Tires take pride in serving Panama City for over 20 years. Baytown Tires on Highway 98 in St. Andrews. All service work backed by a nationwide warranty.
Water is too powerful to fight alone. Mr. Router Plumbing. Sink, shower, and toilet emergency drain services.
All right, welcome back to our Wednesday morning show. I got our second half. I've got Karen Schoen, and I promised we were going to talk a little bit about a constitutional convention, or con, as some people like to talk about it. The good, the bad, the ugly, why we should, maybe why we shouldn't. And I've got Karen Schoen. She had a speaker on last night talking about it on her radio show, on her blog radio. So Karen, tell me what your speaker talked about on the constitutional convention, the good, the bad, the ugly.
Well, it seems as though the people who are in favor of the con just want to have it because it's in the Constitution to have it.
Okay.
And what they are saying about the people who are against having con is that they don't believe in the Constitution. And what I was interjecting was, I have no feeling about a constitutional convention one way or the other, because it is in the Constitution, and it is a tool that we can use to enhance the Constitution. However, my point was, if we don't trust the people that we have elected to follow what we want, we the people, then how can we trust them to go to a constitutional convention and do, and add things in a way that will enhance the Constitution and not take it apart? And there's no answer for that.
Well,
that was what I walked away with, that there is no answer. And what they were trying to do is say, well, you don't want a constitutional convention, you're against the Constitution. And I said, no, I'm not. I believe in the Constitution. What I believe in is the government and the officials that we have elected.
Well, I think most of our government officials don't even believe or follow the Constitution anymore, and we see that every day.
Exactly.
And
so how can we elect them to go to a conference and to work on the Constitution when they can't even elect, when they can't even follow the laws that we have on the books?
Well, a lot of people maybe don't know what a constitutional convention is, and we had our first constitutional convention, 1789? Is that when we had? I'm trying to remember when it was. I know it was after the Revolutionary War, after we won our independence. We had
1780. Yes, it was 1789.
1789 is when we had the Constitutional Convention, and a lot of people, we haven't had one since. And people were, what I've talked to, were worried about if we had a Constitutional Convention, that it might take what we have, the 10 Amendments, and maybe get some of them taken away.
Exactly, and that was my point. And here's another point: if all we're teaching in school is evolution, and evolution says that there is no God, that man is his own God, there is no right and wrong, that man rules himself, and there's nobody, no creator, nothing. So my question then was, well, if there is no God, and if the kids are being taught that there is no God, then where do our inalienable rights come from?
Well, if you ask most people, they say your rights come from the government. We've heard that over and over again. I asked someone the other day. I was down there in Ormond Beach, and I was talking to a young man. He's about 30 years old, and I said, "Well, where do your rights come from?" He said, "The Bill of Rights come from our government." And I went, "Oh, okay." And I wasn't trying to argue. I wasn't trying to be a smart aleck. I just said, "Okay, so that's how you view the Bill of Rights." Yes, that's what our government gives us, and our government gives us the rights. And I said, well, if the government gives you those rights, they can take them away from you. He said, yeah, I guess that's true. And he says, they've already taken away most of them. And I really couldn't argue with him. He was right.
Yeah.
I kind of went, these may be God-given rights, but they've been taken away from us. I mean, the Second Amendment right, we talk about that a lot. That's being infringed. Or our First Amendment right, well, if you don't have the Second Amendment, your First Amendment right gets taken away. We don't have, the Third Amendment is about the only one out there that we haven't had to worry about because we're not having soldiers quartered in our homes. That's what the Third Amendment is. A lot of people don't realize that. But the Fourth Amendment, well, you and I both know the right to have our personal property not searched for unreasonably without a warrant. We see that happen. Asset forfeiture. Right now, $8 billion a year gets stolen from people that haven't even been convicted of a crime. I'm going, what? That's hard to believe. That's hard to believe. So maybe there's something to this Constitutional Convention about staying away from it. You know?
Yeah, that's true too. But then this is really our fault because we're allowing this to be taught. We're allowing false narratives to become true. You know, if you tell a lie often enough, eventually people believe it.
Yeah, that's so true.
I think that, you know, that's a large portion of what's happening. But again, I look at school, and if the kids are not being taught their rights in school, then they're not going to be taught, and they will grow up believing that their rights come from the government, which is the purpose of not teaching them.
Yeah, that's kind of make you scratch your head and go, how does that happen? You're talking about, tell a lie big enough, and I had someone say, well, give me an example of where they've told a lie big enough and we believed it. And I said, do you really want me to give you just one? And he said, if you give me just, I said, I'll give you just one. I said, the Gulf of Tonkin incident. And they said, yeah, that's why we went to war with Vietnam. And I said, it never took place. They go, what? I said, it never took place. If you go back and read the Freedom of Information Act, where it's released, that never took place the way it was described to the American people. So we went to war with Vietnam and lost over 50,000 American soldiers and sailors for a lie. So yeah, you tell a lie big enough lie long enough, people will believe it no matter what. That's just one example. And
another one is one that's happening right now, and look what's going on at the border.
Perfect example.
And how the only democratic narrative has become, oh my God, what they're doing to the children. Well, they've been separating families for decades. This was a bill that came in place in 2008.
Yes, it is.
And I believe that President Trump is following what President Lincoln said, and President Lincoln said, if you have a bad bill, the way to get rid of it is to enforce it.
Well, that's the same thing on the marijuana laws out there.
Exactly.
That's exactly the only reason that's changed is when we see people that need medical marijuana for debilitating diseases put in jail or denied. Right here in Bay County a few years ago, we had a couple that had AIDS that they contracted from blood transfusion, and they were growing marijuana to help the nausea from the chemotherapy they were going through, if I'm not mistaken. And they were Jenkins was their last name. They were sentenced to take care of themselves for the rest of their life, a compassionate sentence. But the thing it is out there, we've got so many people out there giving false narratives. It's scary. They have.
It is. It really is, and that's really up to us to dive in and see what the truth is. I was reading an article yesterday, and they said that of the 12,000 minors, so 12,000 minors are coming to America, and out of the 12,000, 10,000 were not accompanied by their parents. So whose fault is it that the parents have separated themselves from their children? 10,000 parents gave up their children.
Yes, I was going to say that's...
And yet they're blaming we Americans for incarcerating the children. We have no idea who these children are. They're coming here because of a policy that Obama put in place, which said if you're crossing the border with a child, then we'll look the other way.
Well, I know there's a lot of politics involved in it, but a lot of people have told me that Obama sent back more than 500,000 people during his administration. That's 500,000 people, which is more than I think any president since...
He sent back 400,000, but how many did he let in?
Well, I can't answer that. I don't know. The only thing I know...
If I let in 11 million or 12 million and I send back 500,000, I'm going to focus on I sent back more than anybody else. But nobody's asking the right question, which is how many came in during his tenure.
But, if you want to solve the immigration problem, just stop the welfare warfare state. Well, here's
a good question that we can ask our candidates as they are soliciting us for governor, and that would be, will you support E-Verify? Mm-hmm. Will you support closing and not allowing Florida to become a sanctuary state? Will you support not hiring illegals at the price of Americans? I mean, these are real questions that we should be asking the people who we are going to entrust to govern our state.
Well, right now, what is it? The H-1B bills, where most of the people in Panama City Beach that are not Hispanic, from Latin countries, are from Europe, and they're from Eastern Europe, and they're from former Russia, Ukraine, Yugoslavia, and they're coming over here working a visa program. And I don't know how long they stay over here, but they seem to be enjoying it, and it seems to be working quite well for them. And if we didn't have the where you get rewarded for not doing anything by just being a ward of the state, by the welfare state, so I think our problem would actually stop. But it would stop in one day. But so long as people are rewarded, if they do come across the border and they're not penalized by doing it properly, you can't have open borders unless you have. You can't have open borders if you have a welfare state. You can't do it. It's
no,
impossible.
You're right.
You can't.
You're right, because then we have exactly what we're getting, which is masses of people trying to breach our border.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like having your home and having the door open and everybody's coming in. I mean, this is what's going on. You would no sooner leave your doors wide open and invite everybody that you know, which is what's happening.
Right.
Usually you invite people to your home that you know and you enjoy their company. You don't leave the door open and say, "Oh, here's my house, take all my stuff."
Well,
that's what we're doing on the border.
Well, it does seem to be that way, and I know there's got to be, the biggest thing out there says build a wall. I don't think a wall. If you build a 30-foot wall, they'll make a 31-foot ladder. I think.
Well, it's still a deterrent, and I think they're looking at it mostly as a deterrent for drugs.
Yeah, well.
And it's still the wall does work. I mean, we've seen it in other areas. We know it worked in places like Israel, and what are they doing in Poland and Hungary? They're building their borders.
Well,
they're enforcing their borders. So I think we need to enforce our borders.
Well, I understand about enforcing the borders, but the biggest thing is the war on drugs is the biggest thing that's caused the problem in America. Not only is it broken families apart in both Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere, but the drug war is actually destroying countries in South America. It's like Colombia. Mm-hmm. It's destroyed them because of America's policy against drugs. It is exactly so. I'll be honest with you. If let free enterprise work, if people want to destroy themselves with drugs, let them. You can't stop them. Every time the war on drug is a miserable failure. Billions and billions of dollars. And what have we got to show with it? Prisons that are full of people out there, and people still wanting to get in America that don't follow the rules. And it's got to change. And I think the first place to do it is to change the laws, especially the drug war. Stop it.
I agree with you. I believe that the drug war, the drugs, personally, I think they should be decriminalized only because it becomes like prohibition. When you can't have something, you want it more. When you can't have it, you don't want it as much.
That's exactly right. That's exactly why prohibition was abolished. Because they realized it was a failed policy. Hey, we got to go, Karen, up against clock. I'll talk to you again next week. Thank you for calling. Next Wednesday morning, same time. All right, bye-bye, everybody.
Guarantee, beep, 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 yeah!